There's something Joel Goldsmith discovered in his deepest contemplations that he could never put into his books. Something so radical, so revolutionary, so completely devastating to everything the spiritual world believes that even he knew the world wasn't ready for it. For decades, he carried this secret like a burning coal in his chest, sharing it only with his most advanced students in whispered conversations behind closed doors. This revelation doesn't just challenge religious doctrine. It obliterates the very foundation of human seeking itself. It doesn't reform spirituality. It reveals why spirituality was never necessary in the first place. What you're about to discover will either liberate you completely or terrify you beyond measure. Because once you see this truth, you can never unsee it. If you're ready to hear what was too dangerous to publish, subscribe, because this channel exists for those who can handle the truth that destroys all other truths. Chapter 1. The Secret That Shattered Everything. Goldsmith believed, there is no God, there is no spiritual journey, there is no enlightenment to achieve, there is no soul to save, there is no higher consciousness to attain, there is nothing to seek because there is no seeker, there is nothing to find because nothing was ever lost. This was the devastating revelation that came to Joel Goldsmith in a moment of perfect clarity that changed everything he thought he knew about existence. But this revelation didn't come through years of spiritual practice or mystical experience. It came through the shocking recognition that every spiritual concept he had ever taught, every principle he had ever shared, every truth he had ever proclaimed was based on a fundamental illusion. The illusion that there is something called a you that needs spirituality in the first place. Most people hear this and immediately recoil because their entire sense of identity, purpose, and meaning is built on the belief that they are someone on a spiritual journey seeking something greater than themselves. The ego can handle almost any spiritual teaching except the one teaching that reveals the ego was never there to begin with. Goldsmith realized that every spiritual teacher, every religious leader, every mystic and sage throughout history had been addressing an audience that didn't actually exist. They had been giving directions to nowhere, solutions to non-problems, medicines for imaginary diseases. They had been speaking to the mirage of the seeker, while the desert of reality remained completely untouched by any need for seeking. But this recognition didn't make him cynical or nihilistic. This recognition liberated him from the spiritual marketplace of trading techniques for temporary states, practices for fleeting experiences, beliefs for borrowed peace. He saw that what people call God is simply the natural state of what is when no one is there to experience it. Think of someone looking everywhere for their glasses while wearing them. The search is completely sincere. The need feels absolutely real. The seeker is genuinely committed to finding what they're looking for. But the entire premise of the search is based on an overlooked fact that makes the search unnecessary. But here's what made this revelation so dangerous to publish. The moment you see that there is no seeker, the entire spiritual industry collapses. The moment you recognize that there is no journey, all spiritual maps become irrelevant. The moment you understand that there is nothing to attain, every teacher becomes unemployed and every student graduates instantly. Chapter 2. Why every spiritual teaching is a magnificent lie. Every spiritual teaching is designed to help someone who doesn't exist achieve something that's already the case. Every technique is created to fix a problem that was never real. Every practice is developed to reach a destination that you never left. The entire structure of spirituality is built on the assumption that there is a you separate from what you're seeking. But Goldsmith discovered that this fundamental assumption is precisely what creates the very problems that spirituality claims to solve. The belief in being a separate self-seeking union with the divine creates the experience of separation that makes union seem necessary. The conviction that you are incomplete creates the sense of lack that makes completion appear desirable. Spiritual teachings don't solve the problem of separation. They perpetuate it by confirming that there is someone separate who needs to do something to become whole. Religious practices don't create connection with the divine. They reinforce the illusion that there is someone disconnected who needs to practice connection. This is why every spiritual achievement is temporary. This is why every mystical experience fades. This is why every moment of enlightenment seems to disappear. Because they were all experiences happening to someone who was never actually there to have them. They were all modifications of a non-existent entity trying to improve its non-existent condition. But this doesn't mean that spiritual experiences don't happen. It means that when they happen, there's no one there to have them. It doesn't mean that peace, love, and bliss don't occur. It means that when they occur, there's no separate self there to claim ownership of them or to lose them when they fade. Goldsmith saw that what people call spiritual awakening is not the awakening of someone to their true nature. It's the recognition that there was never anyone there to awaken. What people call God realization is not someone realizing God. It's the dissolving of the illusion that there was ever anyone separate from what God is. Think of a movie character trying to find the screen. The character can search the entire movie, study every scene, analyze every frame, but the character will never find the screen, because the character is nothing but projected light on the screen itself. The character is the screen appearing as the character. Yet here's why this revelation was too radical to teach openly. People don't want to hear that they don't exist. They want to hear that they can become better, more spiritual, more enlightened. They want techniques to improve their non-existent condition rather than recognition of their non-existent problem. They want to become someone rather than recognize that there is no one to become anything. Chapter 3. The Death of the Spiritual Seeker. The spiritual seeker is a fiction maintained by the same consciousness that imagines itself to be seeking. There is no actual entity called a seeker looking for truth. There is only seeking happening with no one doing it, just as there is breathing happening with no one breathing it, just as there is thinking happening with no one thinking it. But the illusion of being a seeker is so convincing that it creates an entire lifestyle around seeking. People identify themselves as spiritual seekers and build their entire sense of self around their seeking. They collect teachers, accumulate practices, gather experiences, and measure their progress on an imaginary journey toward an imaginary destination. The seeking becomes a way of avoiding the recognition that there is nothing to seek. The spiritual journey becomes a way of postponing the arrival at what was never absent. The pursuit of enlightenment becomes a way of maintaining the illusion that there is someone unenlightened who could become enlightened. Goldsmith realized that every moment spent seeking is a moment spent confirming the reality of a seeker. Every technique practiced is a vote for the existence of someone who needs the technique. Every teacher followed is an affirmation that there is a student who lacks what the teacher has. But the seeker cannot find what it's looking for because the seeker is what's in the way of finding it. The seeker cannot achieve enlightenment because the seeker is what enlightenment is the absence of. The seeker cannot realize its true nature because the seeker is the false nature that prevents the recognition of what's true. This is why seeking becomes addictive. This is why spiritual practices can continue for lifetimes without resolution. This is why every answer leads to more questions, because the seeking is designed to perpetuate itself, not to reach any final destination. The seeking is the problem disguised as the solution. Think of someone who is afraid of their own shadow trying to run away from it. The faster they run, the faster the shadow follows. The more effort they put into escaping, the more present the shadow becomes. Only when they stop running do they realize the shadow was never actually chasing them. But here's what happens when the seeker finally dies. What remains is not an enlightened someone. What remains is enlightenment without anyone to be enlightened. What remains is truth without anyone to know it. What remains is what was always here, before anyone appeared to be seeking it. Chapter 4. The Illusion of Personal Transformation. No one has ever been transformed. No one has ever evolved spiritually. No one has ever grown in consciousness, because there is no one there to be transformed, to evolve, or to grow. What appears to be personal transformation is simply the recognition that the person who seemed to need transformation was never actually there. But the belief in personal transformation is one of the most seductive spiritual concepts, because it promises that you can become better than you are while keeping the you intact. It suggests that you can improve your spiritual condition while maintaining your identity as someone who has a spiritual condition to improve. All spiritual practices are designed around the premise of personal transformation. Meditation will make you more peaceful. Prayer will make you more connected. Study will make you more wise. Service will make you more loving. But who is this you that all these practices are supposed to transform? Goldsmith discovered that every moment spent trying to transform yourself is a moment spent strengthening the illusion that there is a self to transform. Every technique used to improve your consciousness is a reinforcement of the belief that consciousness is something you possess rather than something you are. True transformation is not the improvement of what you are. True transformation is the recognition that what you thought you were was never actually there. It's not the evolution of consciousness. It's the recognition that consciousness was never personal to begin with. But this recognition threatens the entire self-improvement industry, both spiritual and secular. If there is no personal self to improve, then every technique becomes irrelevant. If there is no individual consciousness to develop, then every practice becomes unnecessary. If there is no separate being to evolve, then every teaching becomes pointless. Think of a caterpillar that believes it needs to work very hard to become a butterfly. The caterpillar studies butterfly techniques, practices butterfly meditations, and follows butterfly teachers. But the transformation into a butterfly is not something the caterpillar does. It's something that happens when the caterpillar completely dissolves. Yet here's what this means for everything you think you know about growth. You are not someone who can be improved. You are not someone who can evolve. You are not someone who can be transformed, because you are not someone. You are the space in which the illusion of someone appears and disappears. Chapter 5. The emptiness that is fullness. What you are is not a thing. What you are is not an entity. What you are is not a being. What you are is the space-like awareness in which all things, entities, and beings appear. This awareness is not empty because it lacks content. This awareness is empty because it is prior to the distinction between empty and full. But the mind cannot grasp this because the mind operates by creating categories, making distinctions, and establishing boundaries. The mind can understand objects, but not the space that contains objects. The mind can comprehend experiences, but not the awareness that experiences all experiences. The mind can analyze content, but not the consciousness that is aware of all content. Most people fear emptiness because they equate it with nothingness, meaninglessness, or death. They spend their entire lives filling the emptiness with experiences, achievements, relationships, beliefs, and identities. They mistake the temporary contents of awareness for awareness itself. Goldsmith realized that this emptiness is not a void to be filled, but the fullness out of which everything appears. It's not the absence of something, but the presence of everything. It's not a blank space waiting for content, but the pregnant silence from which all content emerges and into which all content dissolves. This emptiness is what you are before you think about what you are. This emptiness is what you are when you're not being anything in particular. This emptiness is what remains when everything you think you are is seen to be a temporary appearance in what you actually are. If these words are pointing you toward the recognition of what you've always been, but never noticed, subscribe, not for more content to fill the emptiness, but for continued recognition of the emptiness that you are. But recognizing this emptiness requires the death of every identity you've ever held about yourself. It requires releasing every story you've ever told about who you are. It requires surrendering every image you've ever had of yourself as a separate someone doing, being, or becoming something. Think of space itself. Space is not empty because it lacks objects. Space is the fullness that allows all objects to appear. Space is not nothing. Space is the everything that appears as apparent things. You are like space itself, appearing as the temporary formations that seem to move through you. Here's what this recognition does to your entire sense of identity. You stop trying to be someone and start recognizing that you are the no one in which everyone appears. You stop trying to have experiences and start recognizing that you are the experienceless experiencing in which all experiences occur. You stop trying to become something and start being the nothing that appears as everything. Chapter 6. The love that knows no object. What you are is love. Not the emotion called love, not the feeling called love, not the attraction called love, but love as the very fabric of existence itself. Love as the force that appears as all forces. Love as the energy that manifests as all energies. Love as the consciousness that expresses as all consciousness. But this love is not something you feel. This love is something you are. This love doesn't come and go based on circumstances. This love is the unchanging reality that appears as all changing circumstances. This love doesn't have objects. This love is what appears as all apparent objects. Human love is always conditional because it's based on the illusion of separation between lover and beloved. Divine love is absolutely unconditional because it's based on the recognition that lover and beloved are one consciousness appearing as two. Human love seeks to possess its object. Divine love recognizes that it is what appears as all apparent objects. Goldsmith discovered that what people seek in human relationships is actually the love that they are, reflected back to them through the apparent other. But no human relationship can ever provide the fullness of love that you are, because every human relationship is based on the illusion that there are two separate beings who can love each other. This love that you are doesn't distinguish between friend and enemy, between self and other, between worthy and unworthy. It loves because loving is what it is, not because of any quality in its apparent objects. It's like the sun that shines equally on all things without preference or discrimination. But recognizing this love requires dying to the ego's version of love that always seeks to get something from its object. It requires releasing the need for love to be returned, recognized, or reciprocated. It requires understanding that you are not someone who loves. You are love, appearing as someone. Think of the ocean appearing as waves. Each wave seems separate from every other wave, but every wave is nothing but ocean waving. When waves recognize their oceanic nature, they don't love other waves. They recognize themselves as the love that appears as all waves. Yet here's what this recognition does to every relationship in your life. You stop seeking love from others and start giving the love that you are. You stop trying to be loved and start being love itself. You stop looking for completion in another and start recognizing the completion that you are. Chapter 7. The peace that surpasses all understanding. What you are is peace, not the temporary absence of conflict, not the momentary quiet between storms, not the fragile tranquility that depends on circumstances, but peace as the eternal stillness that remains unchanged, regardless of what appears to be happening within it. But this peace is not something you achieve through spiritual practice. This peace is not something you create through right thinking. This peace is not something you maintain through right action. This peace is what you are when you stop being anything else. Human peace is always threatened because it's based on the attempt to control circumstances, manage thoughts, and manipulate experiences. Divine peace is absolutely unshakable because it exists prior to the realm where circumstances, thoughts, and experiences could ever disturb it. Most people never find this peace because they're looking for it in the wrong place. They're trying to create peaceful conditions instead of recognizing the peace that exists regardless of conditions. They're attempting to quiet their minds instead of recognizing the peace that is aware of all mental activity. Goldsmith realized that this peace is not the result of solving all your problems. This peace is the recognition that the one who seemed to have problems was never actually there. It's not the outcome of getting everything you want. It's the understanding that what you actually are needs nothing because it is everything. This peace doesn't come and go because it exists outside of time. This peace doesn't increase or decrease because it exists beyond measurement. This peace doesn't need protection because it cannot be threatened by anything that appears within it. But claiming this peace requires dying to everything you think peace should be. It requires releasing the idea that peace means having your life arranged according to your preferences. It requires surrendering the belief that peace depends on anything other than recognizing what you already are. Think of the center of a hurricane that remains perfectly still while tremendous forces swirl around it. The stillness doesn't create itself by fighting the storm. The stillness simply is what it is, regardless of what appears to be moving around it. Here's what this peace actually is in your direct experience right now. This peace is what's reading these words. This peace is what's aware of your thoughts about these words. This peace is what remains constant while everything else comes and goes. You are not someone who can find this peace. You are this peace appearing to be someone. Chapter 8. The joy that needs no reason. What you are is joy, not happiness that depends on happy circumstances. Not pleasure that depends on pleasurable experiences. Not satisfaction that depends on satisfied desires. But joy as the very nature of consciousness itself, when it's not pretending to be something else. But this joy is not an emotion you feel. This joy is the absence of the one who could feel emotions. This joy is not a state you enter. This joy is what's revealed when you stop leaving what you are. This joy is not something you experience. This joy is what experiences everything without being changed by anything it experiences. Human joy is always temporary because it's based on the fulfillment of temporary desires. Divine joy is eternal because it's based on the recognition that what you are needs nothing because it lacks nothing. Human joy seeks reasons to justify itself. Divine joy needs no reasons because it's the very ground from which all reasons appear. Most people spend their entire lives seeking this joy in experiences, achievements, relationships, and acquisitions. But no experience can give you the joy that you are. No achievement can provide the fulfillment that you are. No relationship can supply the love that you are. No acquisition can deliver the completeness that you are. Goldsmith discovered that seeking joy outside yourself is like a billionaire searching in dumpsters for money. You already are what you're looking for, but you're looking for it in places where it could never be found because you've forgotten that you are what you're seeking. This joy doesn't celebrate anything in particular because it's the celebration that appears as everything in particular. This joy doesn't depend on good news because it's the good news that appears as all news. This joy doesn't require reasons because it's the unreasonable happiness of being what you are. But recognizing this joy requires dying to every reason you think you need to be happy. It requires releasing every condition you believe must be met for joy to be appropriate. It requires surrendering every story about why you should or shouldn't be joyful. Think of a child who laughs for no reason at all. The laughter doesn't come from getting something or achieving something or understanding something. The laughter simply bubbles up from the pure joy of being alive. This is what you are beneath every reason you think you need to be happy. Yet here's what this causeless joy actually reveals about your true nature. You are not someone who can be happy or unhappy. You are the happiness that appears as someone when no one is there to be anyone. You are the joy that needs no object because you are what appears as all objects. Chapter 9. The freedom that was never lost. What you are is absolute freedom, not the ability to do whatever you want, not the power to control circumstances, not the capacity to avoid consequences, but freedom as the recognition that there is no one there to be bound by anything that appears to be binding. But this freedom is not something you achieve by changing your circumstances. This freedom is not something you gain by acquiring power. This freedom is not something you win by defeating opposition. This freedom is what you are when you stop believing that you are anything that could be confined. Human freedom is always limited because it's based on the illusion that there is someone separate who can be either free or bound. Divine freedom is absolute because it's based on the recognition that there was never anyone there to be either free or bound in the first place. Most people struggle their entire lives for freedom without realizing that the one who is struggling is the only thing standing in the way of recognizing the freedom that was never actually lost. The prisoner and the prison are both appearances in the freedom that you are. Goldsmith realized that every attempt to become free reinforces the belief that you are currently unfree. Every effort to liberate yourself confirms the illusion that there is a self that could be liberated. Every practice designed to set you free strengthens the conviction that you are currently in bondage. This freedom doesn't need to be defended because it cannot be attacked. This freedom doesn't need to be maintained because it cannot be lost. This freedom doesn't need to be achieved because it was never absent. This freedom is what you are before you think about whether you are free or bound. But claiming this freedom requires dying to every identity you've ever held as someone who could be limited. It requires releasing every story you've ever told about your bondage. It requires surrendering every belief you've ever had about what could confine you. Think of space itself. What could imprison space? What could limit the limitless? What could bind the boundless? You're like space itself, free, not because you've escaped from something, but because there's nothing there to be confined. Here's what this absolute freedom actually means for your life right now. You are not someone who can be trapped by circumstances. You are not someone who can be limited by conditions. You are not someone who can be bound by anything that appears to be binding. Because you are not someone, you are the freedom in which the illusion of someone appears. Chapter 10. The truth that destroys all other truths. You are not who you think you are. You are not what you think you are. You are not where you think you are. You are not when you think you are. You are the timeless, spaceless, formless awareness in which all thoughts of being someone, something, somewhere, somewhen appear and disappear like clouds in an empty sky. This is the revelation that Joel Goldsmith could never publish because it destroys everything that every spiritual teaching has ever said about you. It's not that other teachings are wrong. It's that they all address someone who was never actually there to be taught anything. But this truth is not depressing or nihilistic. This truth is the most liberating recognition possible because it frees you from every problem you never actually had, every limitation you were never actually under, every bondage you were never actually in. It reveals that what you've been seeking was what you've always been. You are not a seeker who has found the truth. You are the truth that was never lost appearing as a seeker. You are not a student who has learned something. You are the knowing that appears as the illusion of learning. You are not someone who has awakened. You are the awakeness that was never asleep appearing as someone. This recognition doesn't make you special because there is no you to be special. This recognition doesn't elevate you above others because there are no others to be elevated above. This recognition doesn't solve your problems because there was never anyone there to have problems in the first place. The spiritual search ends not because you've found what you were looking for, but because you've seen that there was never anyone there to be searching. The journey concludes not because you've reached the destination, but because you've recognized that you were never separate from where you were trying to go. What remains when every seeker disappears is not an enlightened someone. What remains is enlightenment without anyone to be enlightened. What remains is truth without anyone to know it. What remains is love without anyone to love or be loved. What remains is what was always here before anyone appeared to be seeking it. This is why this revelation was too dangerous to publish, not because it's false, but because it's so true that it destroys the entire spiritual marketplace. Not because it's harmful, but because it's so healing that it eliminates the need for all healing. Not because it's wrong, but because it's so right that it makes every other teaching irrelevant. The world will continue to offer you spiritual teachings, practices, and paths. Teachers will continue to promise transformation, enlightenment, and awakening. But now you know the secret that none of them can tell you. There is no one there to be transformed, enlightened, or awakened. You are not someone who has discovered a great truth. You are the truth that has recognized itself. You are not someone who has found God. You are God appearing as the dream of someone who was seeking God. This is the revelation that changes everything by revealing that nothing ever needed to be changed. If this message has shattered every spiritual belief you ever held about yourself, Subscribe, not because you need more teachings, but because you're ready to live as the truth that needs no teaching. Not because you want to learn more, but because you've seen through the illusion that there was ever anyone there to learn anything. The revelation is complete. The search is over. What you were seeking was what you always were. What you were trying to find was what was never lost. What you were hoping to become was what you never stopped being. This is the truth that Joel Goldsmith could never publish. This is the truth that destroys all other truths. This is what you are, always have been, always will be. Beyond seeking, beyond finding, beyond everything, nothing appearing as everything. Perfect, complete, free.